Today, we're going to be looking at the popular psychology myth, when dying, people pass through a series of psychological stages. Now, first off, we're going to be looking at supporters of this myth and how they justify their acceptance of it. One of the specific reasons most people believe this myth is true is because they think people need to identify what they're feeling to help them when dealing with the loss. And we can see this in Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's book, On Grief and Grieving, where she states, "There are tools to help us frame and identify what we may be feeling," implying that we need to frame our certain emotions in certain categories. Now, since Elizabeth Kubler-Ross has presented her stages of grief to us in her model, it has been widely accepted, but various sources, reliable sources may I add, such as the American Medical Association, have stated that it has nevertheless never been tested empirically. Here we're looking at a mini survey that I conducted myself, in which I took three random subjects, and asked them whether or not they supported the myth, why or why not they did so, and a certain justification for their thoughts. Subject number 1 believed of the myth because it seemed logical. Her evidence leaned more towards personal anecdote than empirical data. Subject number 2 rejected the myth and stressed the importance of individuality and how every person is different and has unique experiences. Her evidence was again based on personal anecdote. Like subject number 2, subject number 3 rejected the myth because death doesn't occur at a set rate, or so he claimed, and if there isn't a constant, then you can't have a uniform experience. This third justification was again based on personal anecdote. Now let's look at a professional study, the Yale Bereavement Study specifically. And in this study, 233 bereaved individuals living in Connecticut were examined, and data was collected from them from January in 2000 to January in 2003. Now, what they found was that dealing with grief is a lot more complicated and complex than Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's models may imply. To my own surprise, acceptance was the most frequently endorsed item, and yearning was the dominant indicator from 1 to 24 months post-loss. Now, I had mentioned that what they found was a lot more complicated than Kubler's 5 stages, and what I mean by this is that in their study, they found that the psychological responses peaked at certain times, which coincidentally co-aligned with Kubler-Ross's stages. In conclusion, the stages of grief following a death from natural causes enhance the understanding of how the average person cognitively and emotionally processes the loss of a loved one. Now let's look at grieving and resilience, and to that we turn to George Bonanno from Columbia University. He followed people from their bereavement, especially in older couples, and what he found that was 45% genuinely did not experience the stress after the death of their spouse, nor did they as time went on. So in conclusion, passing through a universal series of psychological stages isn't effectively supported and is constantly being challenged by a sufficient amount of research. Rather, the idea that grief is almost always experienced, although differently by individuals, should be emphasized.